Hi, good morning. Today we're going to talk about smothered mate, right? So now what is a smothered mate? A smothered mate in chess usually occurs when a king is completely surrounded by his pieces and it cannot move. So the first thing that we need to take care of is that the king is trapped. And once the king is trapped, simple check with the knight wins the game, right? So basically now our first job or our first goal is to make sure that the king is surrounded by his own pieces. So let's start with a check, right? Because we have a lot of active pieces, and also make sure that you shouldn't move your knight right away or it would lead to a checkmate. Like for example, if you are not careful, or if you play a move like rook, I mean knight to d7 or knight to c6 for that matter, rook e1 would result in a direct checkmate. So yeah, let's activate our queen somewhere around the long diagonal so that it attacks the king. So firstly, yes, the first thing that comes in our mind is I want to play queen e6, but I cannot because of the rook. So the first move that comes in our mind is to play queen b3 check. And there are a couple of moves only, uh, and I pay special emphasis to the word only, right? The first one is king h8, the second one is king f8. Of course, for obvious reasons, you cannot play the move king f8 because of queen f7 checkmate, which is like a helper's checkmate. The queen is helped uh, by the knight. So the only thing left is to play the move king h8. Now, if you want to trap the king, firstly, many kids and adults in this position make this mistake wherein they go, hey coach, directly let's go and play the move queen g8, assuming the fact that rook will capture g8 and then knight f7 would lead to a smothered mate. But then they often miss out on something which is as simple as this, like why would my opponent take with the rook when he or she can take it with the king, correct? So yes, so one more thing which is very important in a smothered mate is to give double checks, right? Uh, so yes, you cannot go queen g8 right away because of king captures g8. So firstly, you need to play a move like knight f7, and then yes, the king must go to g8 because the only possible move available. Knight h6, and again, this is not just a normal check, but it's a double check. If the king goes to f8, then queen f7 is game over. So the king must go to h8, and now comes the move queen g8. Now, if you just take a look at this, the difference between the previous position is that the white knight was on e5. Over here, the knight is on h6. So the king cannot take it because the queen is protected by the knight. So yes, black must indeed go for rook g8, and all the criterias are met. For example, the king is surrounded by all the pieces, the king is trapped, and then a simple move via the knight would help us in checkmating the black king. A move like knight to f7, right? So yes, all the conditions have been met. A smothered mate in chess usually occurs when the king is surrounded by his pieces and cannot move, correct? And then a simple checkmate would be with the knight. So you give a check with the knight, and yep, that is game over. All right, so far so good. So let's move on to our next position, right? The second position. Uh, Again, this is very simple, like basic moves. I'll show you a game that occurred, and the game ended in barely six moves, which is e4, c5. Right, let's go and let's check out knight f3, g6. All this is simple. It's basically the accelerated dragon variation of the Sicilian defense. And then knight c3, d6, bishop c4, all of this is pretty normal. And then yeah, this is something offbeat. You usually do not play the move e5. Whenever you're setting up for g6, you usually go bishop g7 so that there is some activity of the fianchetto bishop on the long diagonal. So e5 is an awkward move. Probably I would say it is an inconsistent move. And then comes the move knight d5, right? Why not take the outpost and black makes this simple mistake of playing the move knight to e7, and it's probably, yeah, it's game over. Why? Because the king is trapped, almost trapped, right? King is surrounded by a lot of black pieces, a lot of his pieces. Only square where the black king can go is d7. So yes, use the knight, give a check, and also control the d7 square. So it's fairly easy. You just play your knight to f6 and it is game over because it's a smothered mate. Alright, so far so good. Let's move on. Keep rolling. Right, this one's also very easy. The conditions are perfect. The bishop and the queen are aligned, right? They have created a battery. The back rank for the white king is safe. The knight is placed in such a way that if the king gets trapped, it can jump over or hover over to f7, resulting in an immediate checkmate. So why not just pause the video for a couple of minutes, or you can always put your answers in the chat. And yeah, it's just like basically trapping the king, making sure that the king can no longer move anywhere. So probably the first thing that comes in your mind is to play the move queen g8, right? The king cannot take it for obvious reasons because the bishop defends the queen, or rather, a better word to use would be a bishop protects the king. So the king cannot capture it. Rook captures, and then the conditions are perfect, right? It is actually an actual game played by GM Alexander Grishchik, probably from one of the rapid championships that he might have won before. So yes, the king is trapped, and then comes a very subtle and simple move like knight to f7, right? uh, that's exactly what a smothered mate is, right? You checkmate with the knight once you make sure that the king is trapped. All right, so far so good. Let's move on to our fourth position of the day. Right, everything seems perfect. The rooks are aligned. So the first check that comes in the mind is that the pawn is pinned. Right, the pawn on f7 is pinned. So the first check that comes in our mind is to play the move knight e6. And after playing the only square or the only move available, king g8, many kids confuse this for the fact that knight f6 is a checkmate. No, knight f6 is not a checkmate because of bishop f6, because of knight f6. So you need to be careful, right? All squares have been blocked. The king is trapped, so you do not go knight f6. Instead, you play the move knight to h6, which is also a checkmate. All right. This one is fairly easy, I must say, but I must need to flip the board. All right. It is checkmate in two moves. Firstly, if this knight moves, the rook controls the entire G file, and we must also take into account that one bad move from black's side of the board, and queen a8 or queen a7 is instantly uh, it's like an instant thing, right, wherein we suffer the consequences. So we have to be very precise and very sure about our approach. So yes, the first move indeed is pretty clear. Firstly, you sacrifice the queen. The king cannot move to anywhere on the g file because of the queen herself. King cannot take the queen because of the bishop. So the only move that defends the checkmate is to play knight f2. And what happens once the knight moves away from the g file is all the squares on the g file are controlled by our rook on g8. So we just follow it up with something simple, something real quick, which is to play the move knight to f2, and it is game over for white. Alright, so far so good. Let's check out our last position, right? And this is a very nice concept. Firstly, you need to bring your queen into the game by following a series of forced moves. I would highly recommend to pause, think for yourself. But okay, this is like basically a checkmate in 3 or 4. Firstly, you sacrifice the rook moves over so that the queen can then slide down to d5. It's a check. If the king goes to f8, queen f7 is game over because the knight protects that square. And if the king goes to h8, you do not have to follow all these formalities. You can, but a shorter way is to play the move knight g6, which is an instant checkmate. All right, I guess we are good for this smothered mate, and you can always take a look at the right hand side of the screen, uh, which will give you more details about the academy, about the number you can get in touch with, about the free demo sessions. Also, take a look at the description so that you can probably go over the actual website of the academy itself. All right, bye bye.